What up, though?
I got to talk. I got to tell what I feel. I got to talk about my life as I see it.
All right, then. It's time for you to bring it to the table.
Turn up your radio wherever you at. We about to bring it.
Streetbeat.
Yeah.
With Tony B.
For the next hour, Tony B will give you a chance to tackle local, national, and international issues that affect your community.
Streetbeat. Streetbeat. Tony.
Welcome to today's edition of Street Beat with me, your host, Tony B. Once again, we'll be talking about the impact of the coronavirus as that continues to be the beat of the city, not just our city, but every city in the country and literally every country in the world. Normally, we focus on South Seattle, although we are quite aware that this impacts outside of South Seattle and that we are all connected, but we have had the opportunity to connect with other communities as well. And that is one way we find out where we're at in this process. We find out some of the challenges that we're having in South Seattle are very similar to the other challenges that folks are having in other communities and other neighborhoods. And then we also hear stories of success of how communities are coming together to, you know, as community deal with this. It's something that, again, has been overwhelming for the government. How do you prepare for something like this? And as you all know, this happened. It's like a light switch was flipped, and suddenly we were into this new paradigm shift into how we act as a country. Today, we are going to talk to the mayor of the city of Bremerton, and joining me on the line is the mayor of the city of Bremerton, Mr. Greg Wheeler. Mr. Wheeler, are you there?
Yes, sir, Tony. I'm here.
Well, thank you for joining us and then sharing with us what's going on in your community. I'm going to want to know a little bit about Bremerton, some of the challenges that you're facing, and then how you are dealing and coping with this as well. But for folks who may not be familiar with Bremerton, I'd like you to start off by giving a little background as though I were from the moon. Even though you are just right across the water, often we don't know much about Bremerton. We don't hear much about Bremerton. We know it's there. We are, again, aware that there's a ferry that connects us. You can also drive to Bremerton, and there are folks who commute back and forth from Bremerton to Seattle every day. Mayor Wheeler, welcome to the show, and would you start off by giving us just, again, even a little historical background on Bremerton and then where you're at today?
Sure. So, Bremerton it's a Navy town. Navy was here first in 1890. Bremerton came in a little bit after that, 1901. I myself am a Navy veteran and retired Navy shipyard, 34 years total service. It's a city with multiple vantage points. It's beautiful. There's water views and mountain views in every part of our town, and it does not matter the income level. They are everywhere. It's a well-connected community with some diverse neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods are interconnected. It's not what you would expect from a mid-sized city. We're on the smaller end of a mid-sized city at 42,500. It's the folks here know each other across a wide range of spectrums. And even as a member of the county, even as a part of the county, it's similar. The relationships matter. They matter here in Bremerton. And friendly folks, people that will step up in an emergency and help each other. And like to celebrate. We have the festivals and like to come out as a community and celebrate. St. Patrick's Day, Armed Forces Day is the biggest one. But Tony, maybe that's a good start to learn a little bit about Bremerton.
All right, thank you. And can you tell us about how you coordinate with other agencies during this? I mean, obviously, the governor has a big say in what takes place. but then I believe there's also Kitsap County, and there's and the health department, the different agencies that you would coordinate with as you started to have to deal with the at one point it was not a pandemic. Now it is clearly a pandemic.
Yeah.
Who are some of those other entities and agencies that you interact with?
Yeah, absolutely. Kitsap Department of Emergency Management, Kitsap Public Health. I email the governor's office multiple times daily. Our state senators, county commissioners once in a while. Sometimes it might be a business agency, so it'll be the Chamber of Commerce. And fortunately, and then if there's some housing situations, personal crises, then I can, I have relationships with the nonprofits or other government agencies, the Housing Authority, the Kitsap Community Resources it's a community action agency, Peninsula Community Health Services. So I've been around this a long time. I was elected as a council member before becoming mayor. I served on nonprofit boards that help many of our most vulnerable folks, and so this is second nature to just kind of triage and just get after it right away. And we didn't waste any time.
All right, and I'm sure it's probably similar for you. But if you can share with us, in emergency situations, the power kind of kicks up. So at this time, do you have the ability to make decisions more quickly? And how does your relationship work with City Council during an emergency situation?
Yeah, so far it's working very well. I have the ability to make decisions quickly. Moratoriums. I'm closing parks. Just this afternoon, I'm going to remove enforcement in the downtown area of on-street parking. It's a wide range of things that have the authority over. The golf course have the authority over that, and so issuing the emergency proclamation starts to give me the ability to enter into contracts. I just yesterday created a COVID-19 emergency rental assistance program, and I modified an existing ordinance from the City Council. I have that authority, executive authority, in an emergency, and we expanded it to meet the needs of folks impacted by COVID-19. And so, that's just a couple examples, Tony, of how things change pretty dramatically. The council so far seems supportive. I haven't been able to check in, but we will check in next Wednesday because the governor's given us some direction on how we can meet. And really what will happen is they'll suspend the current Open Public Meetings Act laws, which require in-person opportunity and gatherings, physical gatherings in one place. Obviously, we can't do that, and so we haven't met in a while. We'll all meet remotely. I'll be right here in my office, and everybody will be in their own various homes and living rooms and offices, and I'll finally connect with them next Wednesday.
All right, and if you could share with us, because we haven't heard a lot about Bremerton. I mean, we're trying to find out about our communities here in South Seattle. But just kind of, and I know you can't take your mayor's hat off, but just as mayor, as a person who's been vested and involved in the community of Bremerton, when things began to unfold here, they started to unravel quickly, at least in Seattle. Really on the 9th of March is when things started really happening. What was going on in Bremerton at that time? Were you feeling the same state of crisis, and now you're getting the governor stepping in? And what was the mood? And for you personally, what were you thinking about the communities, the businesses, the folks in Bremerton as this began to unfold? What was going through your mind?
Well, my first thoughts going in, and I always carry a deep concern for our citizens, especially the ones that I felt were most vulnerable. But the very first thing that I wanted to ensure is we could maintain an operational government, that we could be ready to respond with first responders, that we could continue any type of operation and be ready any need that the governor mandates or a public health district mandated. And so I went into a bunch of protocols for our staff. It's not unusual for me to think this way. When I served in the Navy, I was actually in two combat zones, 2 different times, and so kind of preparing and triaging and thinking, going into another gear, taking it up a notch, is not unusual. Obviously, no one's ever lived through anything like this, but the one thing I wanted to ensure is that we could keep the first responders on the street, keep City Hall operating. So half the workforce is gone now, telecommuting. We've modified how we enforce some laws. We're shutting down some operations, but we're refocusing it. Tony, it was just here in Bremerton, I have a lot of cities have mayors our size and above, where they have a mayor and a city manager or a city administrator or something like that, somebody who runs the day-to-day operations, and then the other person does high-level policy and public means public. They go on radio shows and stuff. I do both. So Bremerton's unique where I do both of those. So I had to tend to my employees, make sure that their concern, their needs were met, and at the same time prepping our city to start hunkering down and being ready to pull together, and then obviously kind of gearing folks towards getting your information from one source, or if you're going to do 2 or 3 sources, make sure they're like Department of Health, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, those type of things. Just kind of getting folks to make sure that the rumors didn't take off. So Tony, this could go on and on, but I've got multiple responsibilities, multiple hats as a mayor, which is kind of unique to Bremerton.
Again, you're listening to Street Beat. It's me, your host, Tony B. My guest joining me is the mayor of the city of Bremerton, Mr. Greg Wheeler. And we're finding out a little bit about what's been taking place in the surrounding community. Bremerton, again, a 50-minute ferry ride, but for some folks, it's like being in a whole nother state, and you are very close. And again, Seattle and Bremerton very connected. I'm sure that there are folks who have family members on both sides of the water, and then again, a number of people who commute back and forth daily. And so I do want to ask you some specific questions. Let's initially address the issue of the commute with the ferries. In that regard, what took place with the ferries and the commute and the transportation and public transportation, and what had to happen in that area? What took place with because the ferry, in Seattle, people may not think about it much, but for Bremerton, it's probably a little bit more important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that was where we had some folks really step up and grab onto the governor's initial. I said when he first started, it was requests for social distancing, and for people to just kind of, and with our own public health district reinforcing that, and so we were putting out the message of voluntarily changing your habits, practicing social distancing. We have folks, instead of getting out of your cars on the ferry, people staying in cars. They were self-regulating as far as getting a couple seats over from each other. The Kitsap Transit, we ended up limiting we have cut in half the number of passengers that could ride on the fast ferry, so we could allow for proper social distancing. And that, those things probably started gearing Bremertonians up maybe a little faster, because that was a way of life. A lot of people don't necessarily jump into a personal occupancy vehicle, and do their own thing out on I-5. A lot of people use mass transit here. The ferry system's one of them. And so, yeah, those are some protocols that went in right away.
Now, and the big thing, obviously, initially for everyone was health and well-being. Can you tell me more? Let's talk about the relationship with Kitsap County Health and their role in all of this. And let's start with, are you familiar with any COVID positive cases in Bremerton, and how is your health system holding up? Are you seeing more folks come in, or what's going on there?
We're seeing more folks. This is just right for we're particularly staff would look like if it as far as our we to see our
you know, Mayor Wheeler, I'm going to interrupt you a second because I'm sure that you're saying something very important. And again, you know, we know that the internet is one thing that's overloaded with the phone, and I'm not getting a clear signal from you right now. And so, can you hear me? Okay.
I can now, Tony. A little while ago, it was a little garbled, you know. And now I just heard those last couple sentences fine. Okay,
so I didn't hear. We were talking about and it was garbled, so we couldn't hear you. So if you wouldn't mind starting that part of the conversation over again regarding King County Health.
You bet. So internally, we're already prepared to go down to 50%, either through quarantine or actually contracting the virus. Out in the community, we're setting up quarantine centers today. They'll be ready by next week. We're setting up another shelter, an actual homeless shelter, so we can divide our folks without homes, so they can help them with social distancing and kind of separating folks. Hospital beds, we've got a little over 200 beds in the county, and you know how that is. It would be pretty easy to exceed that capacity. There's We'll work together pretty closely on that. One of the things I got started right away 3 weeks ago was making sure that our shelters were ready to go and making sure they had the capacity. And it's hard. They've been sheltering people since December, and they're going to have to keep doing it. So I wanted to make sure that they were strong and willing to do it, and they are. Salvation Army. We've got sites that we could use to build a hospital, quick hospital. But Tony, we're gonna. I mean, if the way these cases are beginning to spike, and it's still upward trending, we are ready. We're just ready to exceed capacity and take the next steps.
So in Bremerton, because again, Mayor Wheeler, we don't hear about this. You're starting to see increase in illness, and the numbers are starting to spike for you in Bremerton as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, not to be an alarmist, what happened was there's only so many tests to go around, and so the tests to go over to your side of the water, where the epicenter was. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean, though, that we haven't been spreading here. We just we hadn't gone so far as to have deaths like over in Lakewood. Mm-hmm. And so there wasn't enough tests. We knew there was infection here. We had to practice social distancing, knowing that we wouldn't be able to follow up when, as much as we would like. And so as more testing became available, there was more recommendations for some of our citizens, more recommendations, more testing, more positives. That's what's going to probably kind of concern folks, is when the testing catches up to what's actually happening, you'll see a dramatic spike in positives, and which we should already assume are out there. These will just be confirmed because the testing will show that. That's where it's going to kind of start to, we'll have to just maintain some sense of of order and calm so folks can be ready for this. As more tests come in, more positives, and that means the quarantine levels will have to be more strictly adhered to. Your stay-at-home quarantine, your voluntary, your involuntary quarantine is going to have to be, honored. And then we know there's going to be a percentage from each positive that's going to end up in the hospital, and we're seeing increases now, but we're not pushing capacity. So I don't want to send out a false alarm. Just what's coming though is it will push our capacity, and possibly exceed it, and that's what we're preparing for.
Well, let's talk about some of the economic factors. What is the economy in Bremerton? Do you have large businesses? Is it small businesses, micro businesses? Can you talk a little bit about the economy in Bremerton and how it's been impacted?
Yeah, one of the biggest employer is Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, and they're an essential employee, and that's something unique that I'll talk about a little later. So every one of their 14,000 employees is essential.
14,000.
That's the civil servants. Then
Wow.
There's contractors and active duty military. There's over 23,000 people inside the fence, and I'd say the majority of them are essential workers, just like a firefighter or a police officer. And so
Wow, I just want to go back over that number
here.
again. 23,000 people, what you call inside the fence at the Naval Shipyard.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yep. So it's and most of them are essential workers to national defense. And I don't know how many folks know this in Seattle, but we rotate ships in and out of here that go to all parts of the world, patrol the South China Sea, Persian Gulf when it was active. I mean, it's just every hot spot. This is that shipyard that produces a warfighter. So anyway, long story short, these workers are essential. And so my latest parking direct order coming out this afternoon is to make sure these essential workers can continue. And so we're going to suspend parking enforcement on our streets downtown and ensure that they can come in. It's a fine, delicate dance between those small businesses downtown and the shipyard workforce, but unfortunately our businesses have had to close. And the biggest private sector right now is the car dealerships that sell automobiles to sailors and shipyard workers. They probably make up 20% of our sales tax revenue. And then the rest of it, construction's been booming lately, so 13-14% of our sales tax revenue, and then the rest of it's restaurants throughout the city. We're gonna take a hit. I'm gonna get some numbers pretty soon. Seattle's gonna get their numbers. We'll probably all have a unified approach to what the revenue hit's gonna be, but it's that'll be coming soon.
You're listening to Streetbeat. It's me, your host, Tony B. Again, part of our special series on the impacts of the coronavirus in South Seattle and surrounding communities. And the surrounding community that we are talking about today is the city of Bremerton. Joining me on the program is the mayor of the city of Bremerton, Mr. Greg Wheeler. They're talking right now, if you're just joining in, about the impact that this is having on the business and the economy of the city of Bremerton. Are there a number of small businesses
Tony,
and
I
micro?
lost you.
I'm sorry?
Lost you just now, Tony.
Can you still hear me?
Yep, I can right now.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the small businesses and
Yes.
the micro businesses, and is that a thriving part of the economy in Bremerton?
Oh yeah, yes it is, and that's what's hurting. All of this hurts, but the small business community, that's that's the people down right on the street, you know, our street level. There are in our neighborhoods. They're likely people who live in the city, and that's the ones where I spend hours every day trying to guide them into, you know, let's say, you know, we don't have a lot of small business emergency funds coming in yet. I'm hoping the stimulus package, $2 trillion stimulus package, happens soon. But we do have programs that at least help them with their some of their budget expenses. You know, everybody's got to pay water, sewer, you know, utilities, internet, power, and all of that. And we can work with them on all of those things. Rental assistance we can help them with their own household budgets, keeping the business solvent. You know, what I'm hoping is that we can come up with something creative, a package that comes to us where we don't just burden them with another debt, you know, send them out, go get a loan so they can take on another debt when their margins are super tight already. This has got to help them because this is devastating. I mean, these folks, they're not working. A lot of them aren't eating. And so, you know, at least we can get them on unemployment benefits. I can provide rental assistance. We've got other small programs. But to get them started again, get that business started, we're gonna need something very, very creative and bold from them coming down from the federal government. We're looking at them. We're looking to it. So, yeah, on an individual level, Tony, it's really tough. It's the same thing you're seeing. Folks they're genuinely afraid.
All right. When we come back, we're going to take a quick break here. I want to talk about that next level of those small businesses and micro businesses, and those are the people who are employed there, and also what we're calling the gig workers, and find out what's going on in that area. We'll be back in about 3 minutes. You're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio .world. It's me, Tony B. Streetbeat, and joining me is the mayor of the city of Bremerton, Mr. Greg Wheeler. Will be back to continue this conversation and share more information with you about what's taking place across the water right after this.
Rainier Avenue Radio .world is your 24/7 digital media hub. Tune in at Rainier Avenue Radio .world. Also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and TuneIn apps.
The coronavirus is real. Let's be diligent about washing our hands. Did you know that this virus can live on surfaces for up to 9 days? That's why it's also important to disinfect things that an infected person might touch, like your cell phone. Even if you wash your hands often, when you pull out your phone, those germs go right back on your hands. When's the last time that you cleaned your phone? When the virus is spread by sneezing or coughing, those tiny airborne droplets eventually land on surfaces that you touch with your hands. On average, we touch our face 16 times an hour, which is why it's important to wash your hands and wipe down commonly used surfaces, including your cell phone. This message is a public service of Rainier Avenue Radio .world.
This is Brenda Charles Edwards, host of Seniors Matter. Join me every week to get information on activities and issues that impact the lives of older adults and their families. That's Seniors Matter every week on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Time for a Rainier Avenue Radio news update.
The end of this year's legislative session has been overshadowed by the coronavirus outbreak. The session started with high hopes for new state policies to reduce climate change, warning greenhouse gas pollution stoked by youth climate strikes, as well as cities and the Puyallup tribe declaring climate emergencies. At the start of the session, one key goal was to update the state's statutory limits on greenhouse gas emissions. They were last set in 2008. Lawmakers did commit to setting new limits and getting to net zero carbon by 2050, but they failed to pass the bill that activists say would have made the most progress in actually cutting carbon, the so-called Clean Fuel Standard. The bill once again passed the House but did not get through the Senate, despite a strongly worded letter from 32 House Democrats and 13 House Senators, saying that they saw its passage as a precondition to the passage of a transportation package. A regional version is in the works for the 4-county area covered by the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. Other legislation that passed that chips away at carbon pollution includes one for, quote, sustainable farms and fields, end quote, and one for zero emissions vehicles. Backers say a clean fuel standard would be the fastest way to reduce carbon emissions from transportation, our biggest source of greenhouse gas pollution here in Washington. Opposition comes from people concerned about the prospect a clean fuel standard would cause gasoline prices to go up. Some, such as farm workers, are concerned it could damage their equipment. Supporters say these claims are not grounded and that the experience in other states on the West Coast provide ample data to show that the policy is effective.
Rainier Avenue Radio News.
Lávate las manos y desinfecta las cosas a tu alrededor. El coronavirus es real. Sé diligente cuando de lavarse las manos se trate. Es increíble saber que este virus puede vivir en superficies por hasta 9 días. Por eso es muy importante desinfectar las cosas que una persona infectada puede tocar, como tu celular, por ejemplo. Incluso si te lavas las manos frecuentemente pero usas tu celular, los gérmenes que éste tiene regresan a tus manos inmediatamente. ¿Cuándo fue la última vez que limpiaste tu teléfono? Cuando el virus es esparcido por tos o estornudo, unas pequeñas gotas viajan en el aire y caen en superficies que puedes tocar con tus manos. En general, nos tocamos la cara 16 veces cada hora, y es por eso que es muy importante lavarnos las manos y limpiar las superficies que comúnmente usamos, incluido nuestro teléfono celular. Este mensaje es un servicio público de Rainier Avenue Radio .org y Somali Youth and Family Club.
This is Paul Pearson, host of Star Time, and when I'm not driving my sweet AMC Pacer through the car wash, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. You missed a spot.
Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. You know what? I forgot about the Pacer. I guess. This is Tony B, your host of Streetbeat. Again, this is part of our extended series. Now, we started this on March 13th, where we are talking about the impact of the coronavirus on South Seattle and surrounding communities. Right now, we're talking about the impact on the city of Bremerton, and joining us is the mayor of the city of Bremerton, Mr. Greg Wheeler. Mr. Wheeler, are you still there?
I am, Tony. Still here.
All right. And so we had just kind of talked about the impact on small businesses, micro businesses. And now that leads to the folks who are employed by these businesses, which are people who probably live in the community.
Yes.
It's their lifeline. And then the gig workers, people who, again, may not be getting paid leave or sick leave. Can you kind of tell us what's going on with that particular group of people, and if there is that group of people, folks who are part of the Bremerton communities?
Yeah, there is. I'd say, I got to tell you, let me give you a little snapshot of what type of small businesses we have. I don't know if this will help, but we have a B&O tax like some cities. Small businesses don't necessarily like it, and I totally get that. But we have the exemption level at about $240,000 a year. So everything under $240,000 a year isn't taxed. 70% of the businesses in the city don't make over $240,000 a year. It gives you an idea of just how many really small businesses, mom and pops with maybe one or two employees are out there. So, and then the gig economy, we do have a lot of that, and that's, I think, what the gig economy. I think one of the hardest things with that is documenting. Tony, you can give me what's your interpretation of the biggest impact, but it's documenting income. Mm-hmm. It's that you're kind of working, and you're not really in an environment where you're paying into an unemployment system, and you're not collecting any health benefits, or you're not getting any leave of any kind. Is that kind of the gig economy you're thinking of? And
yes,
that's big. We have a lot of folks like that, and one of the things that, and I answer a lot of emails too from the folks. We can at least offer assistance for utilities, and we got to work right away. No one's going to lose their utilities. There's rental assistance we put into place. We're starting today. We put it in last night. We can bridge the gap till till the unemployment comes in for some of these folks, and hopefully federal aid for others. But we're going to kind of gauge that impact on a case-by-case basis, understanding that some folks it's harder to document income, and support might not come to them until federal aid comes in. So that's why the City of Bremerton program is so unique, and why we put it together. It's just, people pull together. I hope no one's too proud to go to a food bank right now. Nobody's going to be too proud. It is okay to go out and get that assistance. The hardworking folks, and all work is honorable, and the folks that they're out of work right now, they just need to take care of themselves and their families. There's other assistance we're offering as far as business licensing and taxes and filing and all of that. We're just saying, just take care of yourself. We'll settle up down the road, and we'll do it in a way that it's not going to be painful. We'll do it in a way where you can catch up. And I don't know how to explain it, but I get 50 emails a day. I get 20 Facebook messages. I've got phone calls coming in. It's just from folks because when I campaigned, I knocked on over 16,000 doors. I met them on their doorsteps in our city, and they do feel like they can reach out to me. But I can tell you, there's a lot of pain, a lot of fear right now.
Mayor Wheeler, can you kind of describe for us the communities? If you were listening over that break, you probably heard us air one of our public service announcements in a different language, which at this point we are airing public service announcements in 11 different languages, and we could do more. But we are airing right now in 11 different languages. What are the communities like? Black and brown people, immigrant population, marginalized communities. You mentioned kind of like everybody's all together there. What is the makeup of Bremerton when it comes to those types of things?
Yeah, there's some diversity here. I'm not sure. I don't know how it stacks up to other communities. Hispanic community, Guatemala is a destination, or from a lot of folks from Guatemala picked Bremerton. Don't necessarily speak English as a first language. African American community is very strong and unified. There's a mix of Pacific Island that we have a strong presence in, and then a lot of mixed race. If you're going to break it down, demographically by race, it's and I don't know the percentages in that. Our school district. We have the Bremerton School District. Probably we're at 70% reduced or free breakfast and lunch. And those are programs that you don't get reduced or free unless you're at a low income level. My city is very average low income. So that's kind of the makeup. Most of it are just pretty modest blue collar neighborhoods. I live close to downtown. I've been here since I got out of the Navy 35 years ago or so, or actually it's getting close to 40 years ago. But yeah, it's just, Tony, I guess I'll just maybe let you ask a few more questions to see if I can dig a little deeper into what you're looking for.
Okay. And with that thought in mind, I'd like you to tell me a little bit about, I'm sure you had an emergency or disaster plan in place. One of my favorite quotes is from Mike Tyson when someone was asking him about how a boxer he was going to fight and the strategy and the planning that this boxer had. And Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Absolutely.
Well, did you have a disaster plan? I'm sure you did. And if you did, this was a little bit different. How did this work? How prepared were you to deal with this? Wasn't an earthquake. It's something that we weren't anticipating.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of lived through scenarios like that, Tony. I mean, for a few of us, I mean, for one thing, military background, we got a lot of ex-military in the city. And then shipyard, where you work in the defense industry on combat ships, warships. So you kind of, what ends up, to put it in Mike Tyson's words, what you do is you develop your plans on getting punched in the nose. And that's because I know it's a perfect analogy. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the nose. And so what I did, I tell you, I put my team personally through the drill, through the paces, big time. We had a complete shutdown protocol, ran through attrition rates, almost like casualties. What would we do to enforce the law? How could we protect people? If we only had half the police officers, or we couldn't put people, there was no jails anymore for violent criminals, or no court system. We ran through all those drills. We're actually prepared for a heck of a lot worse than we've seen. And it was just, I got to tell you, it was just kind of almost a natural to kick it into a gear that's a gear that you normally don't have to kick it into as a regular civilian. And for me, it was just commonplace. I was putting our team, my directors, through all kinds of scenario drills. And what will you do in this case here? What are you going to do here? And so that was before this even became kind of newsworthy. It was really the first outbreak in Lakewood. So we were ready. We've been moving fast. You might not be able to track it over in Seattle, but we've been following the governor's lead also. And in fact, on some things, staying. In some instances, we've been just doing things on a local level that were different because they were more localized to us, more unique to us. And then the governor's directive helped to reinforce some of the things that we were doing. So it was, Tony, it's just, and the city is the same way. And we have a lot of vulnerable folk, but everybody geared towards looking out for them. And first thing I did, I went to the shelter, like I was saying earlier, talked to Salvation Army, found out if they were still strong and ready to go for another 6 months, maybe, around the clock. Those kind of things. I probably have a unique background for a mayor. It's not unusual for me to have been in a situation where I've had to put on a respirator and do all kinds of drilling in types of different conditions and stuff. So anyhow, I got to tell you, we just adapted to the information we had, and we just moved forward pretty quick.
And on that note, when we become, which we were, isolation and quarantine, and for some communities, they have gathering places where folks will share information at physical locations. With folks under isolation, what are you doing, and do you feel comfortable to know that there are community members out there whose needs are being met, or finding out what those needs are when you're under isolation and when you may not be aware of what's going on? What are you doing to ensure the best you can that the needs of your various communities, and in particular your marginalized communities, are being met, so that you're not surprised and overwhelmed?
Right. Well, we've got a standing teleconference. Attended the first one last Friday, and so for folks, different nationalities and race, the NAACP local leader has started a teleconference, which I'll attend again Friday night, 6:30, and we'll share. I won't be in there so much as the mayor, although I can never not be the mayor. But I'll be there to share information and then to take feedback from different parts of our community. Tomorrow, I'll be dialing into the Chamber of Commerce, and that's that small business community. And when you do that, you're also, like with Bremerton, you win this battle before it starts. If you develop a big enough network, and it's cross, it's the word I'm looking for is just it's a very diverse network, and if it's interconnected, then what ends up happening, if you have it and it's strong, then you're not trying to start something in a disaster. And so I've already had these relationships established, and so what ends up happening is like the pastors. We've got the Sinclair Missionary, we got Mount Zion Missionary, we got African Methodist Episcopal, we got the Emmanuel Apostolic. If you're dialed in, then all of a sudden you're connecting with individuals who are interconnected with a whole bunch in their community, and so you just maintain those relationships. I worked on them for years and years and years, long before I became mayor. The second nature to just continue reaching out. One bit of good advice I got is we're gonna, for the first time in Bremerton's history, we're gonna translate into Spanish some of our messaging. Mm-hmm. And we're a smaller city, smaller budget. I can't afford to have a translator on staff, but I can partner with another agency to translate key information just so we can have it. And it's not so much, what that displays more than anything is not that everybody's going to read it off Facebook, but it displays awareness and caring for a population who doesn't speak English as a first language. It makes them more apt to reach out, to be included, not to feel isolated. And of course, I already work with folks who interconnect with the communities. We're already doing that. But this is just another way of being welcoming. And I hope that kind of answers a little bit, Tony. If we ever learn anything going forward, it's something I've already learned is you prep, you develop the relationships, you go over some scenarios, you just kind of keep yourself prepped. And just pretend like something's already bad happened and then you need to draw together. We should be living like that all the time. We should always be drawing together.
You're listening to Streetbeat on Rainier Avenue Radio. This is part of our series on the coronavirus, the impacts of COVID-19 on South Seattle and surrounding communities. We're talking about one of those surrounding communities now across the water, Bremerton, and our guest is the mayor of the city of Bremerton, Mayor Greg Wheeler. As we're winding down on this conversation, there's a number of things that obviously we could get into, but I want to make sure that we talk about education and what has happened to the educational system. Here in Seattle, at least in some communities, we have what we call the digital divide, which is where you have folks who are connected to the internet, folks who are not connected to the internet. That has resulted in some of our students being able to learn from home, and some of our students essentially being on extended spring breaks. What's going on in Bremerton regarding education and the youth?
We're Tony, I think I got most of that. Olympic College is doing pretty well with online and distancing. That's our local community college. Public school, K through 12, I would say that's pretty mixed. And it's tough. I got to tell you, with a lower income community, with challenges, household challenges, to where maybe a support system may not be at home. And maybe that support system's actually coming from the Boys and Girls Club or the school itself. It's tough right now, and I think we're I think we're probably losing some valuable ground here with our students. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, I think that our school district is what they're doing to reach out when they can and to continue feeding students whose only meals were coming from school is phenomenal. And I know they're working on setting up distance learning. I think we could get in. There's a couple things we could really get into some deep subjects here about distribution of resources and how one community might have a wealth of resources and another one might not even have a fraction of it based on income. And I think we all know that there's some income inequalities that lead into situations, and I got to tell you, we're gonna fight through this together, and I'm going to support the school district. I've got a call from the superintendent. I'll see what he needs. But Tony, I think you probably know where I'm coming from. We got some work to do.
And I think it was OSPI. I'm not sure which one of the state. I think it's on the 31st. It said you now have to start educating students, and that you're kind of put into a position. And again, I know you've got the superintendent of schools and these things all work, but as mayor, it kind of still falls under your purvey.
Absolutely.
So again, how are you coordinating? Who are you coordinating with? And if there's not anything there yet, you won't be alone in this. But still, with this mandate now from the state that there have to be some things put in place. And at the end of the day, Mayor Wheeler, I'm sure you understand that this time is not going to be made up. Kids who are behind are going to be behind, and this the way that this manifests itself later might show up in ways that will probably be a disadvantage to the same people who are usually disadvantaged. Poor folks who are on the lower end of the spectrum.
And that's the thing is, to have a mandate like that's going to have to be backed up with resources. And I could see where we could distribute laptops if needed. If the mandate is for distance learning, then that's doable. I mean, I've got my MBA distance learning. Mm-hmm. It's not everybody is geared towards distance learning, but at least it's an opportunity for folks to do it. And so the mandate, we'll meet that mandate, and I'll continue to advocate along with those for fair and equitable resources to all of our neighborhoods. When that opportunity comes up, we need to have equal access to education and all the opportunities it brings. Education is power. And so, with that, it's just a day. We'll just keep fighting. We'll if it's a resource center like the Kitsap Community Resources, Martin Williams Center, if there's a place where we can, or down at Boys and Girls Club, if it comes down to distributing supplies and having a central gathering place and coordinated staggered times to eliminate social distancing, or all the things that are going to have to be required to keep the spread of the pandemic. We'll work through it, and that'll be me, because I'm going to be the one that's going to authorize those type of gatherings and how we monitor it. Tony, these are incredibly. I haven't seen. I got to tell you, I haven't had that mandate shared with me yet. My gosh, I'm going to have to see what kind of resources are being provided. Mm-hmm. And if that's in alignment with the governor's directive to make sure people don't, stay distant from each other so they don't spread the virus. Yeah. So I'll dig in on that. We will come up with something, but I've more to learn on that from my part.
And then with the laptops, you need to be able to connect them to the internet if you do get the laptops, and that's a whole another issue. Mayor Wheeler, we're almost out of time here. It seems as though the time just flew by. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us on Rainier Avenue Radio and share with our community what you're doing and what your community is going through. And then I'm sure that we have some folks listening in Bremerton as well. And I do want to give you the opportunity for final words here, both to say what you'd like to say to folks listening in our community. One of the byproducts of us doing these shows is we've increased the listenership locally, but then ironically, the other thing that's happened is folks are now listening in far greater numbers regionally, nationally, and even internationally. So that's part of our audience, if there's something that you want to communicate to them. And then also an opportunity for those who may be listening in Bremerton as well. Again, your opportunity here for final words.
Right. So I guess for my part, Tony, since I'm going to stick with the virus that we are combating, COVID-19. If we're now at this point, we're all in this together, and I here in the city of Bremerton, I'm sure I share it with other communities. I don't know of a family that's not impacted by this. Some of our younger folks are in the prime of some of their lives, that are their education, they lost their first job. Some of our seniors who seemingly seem to be well established, all of a sudden are vulnerable because of their age. Health. There's no divide with health. That's good health and bad health, and being compromised doesn't really have a barrier there. We all share these in our families. What we're doing now, while some of it might seem odd, these extreme measures, but they're meant to slow the spread, not stop it. It's still a very contagious virus. There's still a whole bunch of people who are going to get it. You slow it enough to where there's enough beds and enough people to actually help somebody stay alive who actually ends up in that hospital bed. If we don't slow it enough, then what happens is beds go out into hallways, or they go into field hospitals, and you get 100 people with 3 nurses, and you get enough equipment to treat 10 people, and then you triage and you make life and death decisions, and unfortunately you have to choose who lives and who dies. These practices prevent the spread accumulating so quickly, where there's an arc where we're in that environment. So folks will practice the things that you're hearing. Doesn't mean you're not going to spread it, you're not going to get it. Its intent is to spread it out enough where we don't exceed our hospital bed capacity and our resource and our healthcare professionals' capacity. I'm just going to stick with that, Tony. It's vitally important. It's deadly serious. So thanks. And I don't know if you have a chance. Do you want me to answer questions, or do you have to sign off? That's up to you.
Well, we have reached the limit, and again, we could probably be on the air. I'm sure we could be on there for another hour, but we've reached a time limit here. And Mayor Wheeler, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to share with us here on Rainier Avenue Radio. I hope you know that if there are ever messages or information that you'd like to get out there, that we will be your resource for that. And then it would be great to get you on again sometime here in the future and just get an update with you so that we can continue to know what you're going through, as we, again, like you said, are all going through this together. And the more we know about each other, I think the better off we'll all be.
Perfect. I totally agree, Tony. Perfect recap.
Well, thank you for joining us. Again, you're listening to Streetbeat with me, your host, Tony B. My guest has been Mayor Greg Wheeler, the mayor of the city of Bremerton. I hope that you got something out of listening to what's happening inside of a community, a city, actually, outside of Seattle. But again, across the water, 50-minute ride, and a 90-minute drive around if you take the bridge over there. And we are all in this together. That's it. That's all the time that I have. That's going to do it for the kid. It's me, Tony B., your host of Streetbeat. We will have a show coming up tomorrow from 1 to 3. Joining us will be the regional representative of Safeway to talk about what if things get tighter, what they're going to do, what they're going through now. Again, everybody goes to the store, no matter where you're at or what your situation is, and so there have to be special precautions taken there. We'll also have Leigh Thomas joining us from Feast. They've been delivering food to folks since its inception. Also, Josephine Howell, our Seattle songbird who's traveled around the world, is COVID-19 positive. She's going to join us to tell us about how that's impacting her, and she definitely wants to get the word out that if anybody was in contact with her, that they need to maybe potentially get checked. And then our own former Seattle Seahawk, Doug Baldwin, with his Family First Foundation, will be joining us tomorrow to tell you what he's doing as well. That's all from 1 to 3. And so we will get back to you again tomorrow. Until then, remember, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you can't, you are probably right. I'm out. Peace.